Thank you all for coming to be here today. Our session today is a conversation between Mohammed Hanif. He's a journalist who's worked at Newsline, at the Washington Post, at BBC. He's an author, the author of A Case of Exploding Mangoes and Our Lady of Alice Bhatti. He's in conversation today with Mirza Waheed, another author. His first novel, The Collaborator, was an international bestseller, a finalist for the Guardian First Book Award and the Shakti Bhatt Prize. The Book of Gold Leaves is his latest novel. It was published in 2014. He's written for the BBC, The Guardian, Granta, Al Jazeera, and the New York Times. Today, the two of them are in conversation of love in a place of war.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, Mirza Waheed. Welcome to Karachi. मिर्ज़ा वहीद साहब के बारे में सिर्फ 2-3 मुख्तसर सी बातें करके फिर हम इनकी बातें सुनते हैं. जैसा कि बताया गया कि ही इज़ द ऑथर ऑफ 2 fabulous internationally acclaimed award winning novels, The Collaborator and The Book of Gold Leaves. लेकिन उसके अलावा आप सबको अरुंधति रॉय बहुत पसंद होंगी, लेकिन अरुंधति रॉय को क्या पसंद है? मिर्ज़ा वहीद की किताबें. So I think that's he's also a very very fine essayist. तो उस पर भी हम थोड़ी सी बात करेंगे और हम इनसे ये भी दरख्वास्त करेंगे कि ये अपनी किताब के कुछ हिस्से हमें पढ़ के सुनाएं. उन्होंने पिछले साल भी आना था, लेकिन कुछ वजूहात की वजह से ये नहीं आ सके. और मिर्ज़ा वहीद जो है हमारे बहुत पुराने दोस्त भी हैं. अगर इसमें कुछ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट हो तो मैं अभी से डिक्लेयर कर दूं. हम लोग साथ काम करते थे, साथ जो है शादियां, बच्चे और उसके साथ साथ जो बाकी लवाजमात होते हैं वो हम लोग सब आगे पीछे कर चुके हैं. और ये गाना भी बहुत अच्छा गाते हैं. तो अगर आखिर में जो है कोई आप कोई फरमाइश करेंगे तो हो सकता है ये भी
is this I don't know how to make it work really. Is this better? Yeah. Thank you.
वहीद आपके दोनों नॉवेल जो हैं वो कश्मीर जो है उसमें कश्मीर में वो सेट भी हैं और कश्मीर उनमें एक मेन मेजर कैरेक्टर भी है. और उससे पता भी ये चलता है कि आपको अपनी ज़मीन से कितनी मोहब्बत है, क्योंकि उसके बारे में जितनी खूबसूरती के साथ आपने लिखा है बहुत कम लोग अपने वतन के बारे में, अपनी उस जगह के बारे में लिखते होंगे. तो थोड़ा सा पहले शुरू में हमारे ऑडियंस को बताइए कि द कोलैबोरेटर जो पहला था नॉवल और उसके बाद द बुक ऑफ गोल्ड लीव्स जो है, इसका जेनेसिस जो है वो क्या था, शुरू कहाँ से?
Thank you all for coming. Very briefly, I always love to come to Karachi, not just because it's one of the best cities in the world, one of my favorites, but because I know I do love Karachi, but also my wife is from Karachi. She grew up in Karachi, and I met her here at this hotel for the first time, by the way. I thought I should mention it. I couldn't resist. Probably in this hall or another one, many years ago. I wrote my first novel in London I started in the winter of 2007. And I had had this germ of an idea in my head from the time I was a teenager, when you have delusions of, becoming a writer, or you think you have things to say, or you are a storyteller, none of which are true, obviously. Because So I had this germ, this premise in my head for a long time, but I didn't know what to do with it. And the premise was a simple one, because when I was a teenager, growing up in Srinagar, which is, as you all know, the main city in Kashmir, it's a great city, it's a magical city, of course brutalized and bruised and hurt. I grew up by the very famous Dal Lake, which is a 10-minute walk from where I grew up. And in those days, I'll try to keep this very, very brief. We used to have these operations called coordinate search operations, but locally they were termed as crackdowns. When entire units of the Indian Army, armed forces would descend on a town or a part of a town and surround it and then ask all men to leave their houses early morning. We would be asked to gather in an open space somewhere in the neighborhood where you would be asked to walk in front of a army vehicle, a jeep, inside which would be a masked informer who would identify the next person as a militant or not militant, as someone to be taken away, never to come back, or not to be taken away. So this was routine when I was growing up. This was not, in a couple of years after the insurgency started, it became almost banal to see this because we were used to soldiers, outside. One of these crackdowns, and everyone in Kashmir, nothing special about my being in a crackdown, everyone in that time would have faced some kind of, a crackdown. I remember one in particular, we were asked to leave our houses early morning one day, and we were asked to gather in the grounds of a hospital. And as I was walking, there were some bodies in, just a few feet away. And I was about maybe 16, and I remember seeing one of the bodies stirred. There was some life in it. And I like to imagine that this person who was on the floor, along with 3 or 4 other bodies, asked for water. And you have to imagine you're a young person, you have a slightly feeble sensibility, and you remember this scene forever, that there was this person who was probably asking for water, or I imagined it, but he was alive, and soon he wasn't alive. But we were expected to behave normally. You're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to keep walking to your designated seating area, which is the ground, where you're supposed to sit all day until it's your time to be paraded in front of this horrible, horrible vehicle. And this was a 3-day crackdown. My uncle was there, my father was there, both my uncles were there, so youngsters, men, everyone. That image of bodies lying around, just, ordinarily in front of you, and you're expected to behave normally. You're expected to walk in a straight line. And of course, the idea to do something about it doesn't cross your mind, because if you stir, a rifle butt is going to hit you on your head, or whatever. Years later, as I was in London, but this image did something at that time. Innocence, years of innocence, and you're a young person, and you have ideals, and you think you read books and you play cricket. It stayed in my head, and many, many years later, I transported this image, which was real from my teenage years, into a valley in the mountains. This was in the urban setting. This was in an urban setting. This was in Srinagar. Srinagar is a very old city. So many years later, as I was trying to write about this image, I transported it to the mountains of Kashmir. Mountains of Kashmir that border Pakistan, where a lot of the fighting in the 90s took place, which also meant where a lot of the debris of the fighting was left behind. And that debris meant thousands and thousands of dead bodies that I had witnessed, 4 of them in the city. This was roughly the premise of The Collaborator. And then, as it happens, you are a debut writer, you don't know how to write, you never know how to write, I like to think. And you want to see what you can do with it, and you're not sure of your craft, you're not, you haven't read enough, I think. But I was lucky that I wasn't too young. I think it's a stupid idea to write novels when you're in your 20s, for me. So I thought I was grown up enough to write a novel, or I had read enough novels. You never read enough, of course. And then I just experimented with it, and I gave it to my first reader, who happens to sit with me right now. and as I said, there is some conflict of interest here, but what the heck. Sorry. And I thought there was a novel in this premise. It was a long section I wrote in one night in my little house in North London, and that became the first novel. And it was, yeah, I tried to write about beautiful things in the first novel. You know, Kashmir is, as you all know, beautiful place. It's a wonderful, it's gorgeous. We have all these things that you see in Indian films, most of which are bad films about Kashmir especially. But we also had that sensibility, that germ in your head, that you consume the portrayal of Kashmir via cinema primarily when you are young. And the cinematic representation of Kashmir is probably the worst kind, because all you see as a young person is you see Sharmila Tagore on the Shikara, or Shami Kapoor singing wonderful songs, or so they use Kashmir as a prop for decades. And that also, if you, as I said, if you read a little bit, you think there's something odd here. You know, there are people here who actually, you know, who all of them don't ride horses. All of them are now not, boatmen. That was what we saw as young people, that every Kashmiri is a boatman, every Kashmiri wears a skull cap. So that also, you know.
I'm very curious, sort of living through that hell, and a whole generation now, probably the third, fourth generation, is kind of is witnessing that and going through that. And then people, obviously young people especially, they respond to it, and some sort of, you know, think that this is that we live in a war zone, and when you are in a war zone, you will pick up a gun and you will try and fight for your side. And others who kind of think that maybe I'll go and report on it, or write a novel about it. Can you tell us a little bit how those decisions are made in one's head? What kind of, you kind of grew up with lots of people, and I'm sure some went on to kind of, you know, do other things, and you decided to do this. How are those decisions made?
I don't think that you sit down and deliberate, and especially when you're a young person, that do I, pick up a Kalashnikov and learn how to use it, and I don't think you deliberate for days and days, and then I think most of those decisions amongst young people who decide to fight are come from an impulse. And come from a trigger. As far as my personal experience is concerned, that's what I saw in people who grew up with me, who I went to school with, who I played cricket with. Many of them, became militants. If not a lot of them, but some of them chose to do this. But I think the triggers for most of them were instant, were witnessing something on the street you grew up in, or the playground you used to play cricket in is suddenly turned into a graveyard, and some people cannot deal with that, and they decide that I must do something about it, and the only course of action left for in that person's life at that time, because it is a siege, it is a military siege, it is a vast prison, and you have crackdowns and curfews that last not days and weeks, that last months. One of the longest when I was growing up was 70 days. So when you put young people in that framework, in that situation, in that scenario, they will do all kinds of things, and I don't blame them. That if so there was a massacre in the part of Srinagar I grew up in, 92 or something, and everyone used to take that road. It's a big road near a famous place of education called the Islamia College of Science and Commerce. There was a massacre on that road, and I remember going to the site of the massacre after the massacre, and my memory of that massacre is piles of slippers, heaps of slippers, but someone else who saw something even worse, who probably saw those people in those slippers, decided to take the next available bus to we used to, sorry to slip in a little, not joke. Back in those days, we used to hear, we have bus conductors that tell you of the destination the bus is going to. We used to have a little story in across Kashmir that bus conductors started saying pindi 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 pindi, which meant you would collect these boys from wherever they were in Srinagar or other towns, and then they would be dropped off at the last border town, Kupwara or some place like that, from where they would begin their journey into Pakistan. So a lot of those boys took those bus rides. Boys I knew, I grew up with. Sorry, no, please. No, I didn't have it in me. Maybe I was just, I read too many books or too many comics, and I played cricket.
And you sang, because boys sing in your...
I used to sing. I have to correct. And I would be dishonest if I said that the idea didn't cross my mind, because it crossed everyone's mind. It is a complete fabrication when you see in sections of media that this is Pakistan sponsored, and this is so on and so forth. These are demons, these are mercenaries, these are bad kids, these are terrorists, and so on. It wasn't like that. It was your next door neighbor. It was your cousin. It was the other fabrication, the other lie that we've been told all these years is that these are poor kids. This is about class. These are mostly people from poor families. But in the beginning, that wasn't true either. Some of the earliest militants in Kashmir, they were from the top school in Kashmir called Burnhall or Biscoe. These are two missionary schools, very old. Some of the kids who came to Pakistan were from that school because they had read. They modeled themselves on Che Guevara. But that is not just the one truth. There is also the other idea that there are people who didn't have anything. They suddenly had a cause.
We'll come to that. This reminds me, one of the Indian journalists kind of went to Srinagar when there was a bit of a calm and came back with this bizarre story that basically what people want in Srinagar is a McDonald's and not freedom. And why are we? Your second book is the Book of Gold Leaves. Is a very tender, beautiful love story, and one of the protagonists is a craftsman. He kind of he paints, and he also then at some point kind of ends up with the same thoughts that you were talking about earlier. Tell us a little bit about how this, and there is a bit of family history in this as well. Tell us a little bit about that, and then if you would be kind enough to read us a passage from the Book of Gold Leaves.
No, this book, I had children and I became a different person, and I wanted to write a nicer book, or probably less dark, definitely. I have a daughter, and she probably made me into a nicer person or something. That's what happened. There's this one of the main characters is called Faiz, who's named after the Faiz. He is a paper mache artist. Paper mache artist is an artisan who makes little jewelry boxes, pencil boxes for to be sold in Western markets, to be sold to Western tourists or Indian tourists or Pakistani tourists who we never see in Kashmir. Rarely, apart from Junoon, who came and did a concert at some point. It wasn't a great concert. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it it's not a music criticism, it wasn't a great concert. They're lovely. So my grandfather was a paper mache artist of some renown. He was among the finer paper mache artists in Kashmir. He was an eccentric man, and his whole mission in life was to make sure that all his children receive university education, because he himself didn't have a university education, and he wanted to do it by the sheer dint of his brush, which he roughly did. So I grew up watching him paint. But I didn't grow up watching him paint masterpieces or art. He had to produce as many things as possible in a day's work in order to make a decent living, which he did because he was quite good. And I did a little bit of it myself. Interestingly, during one of the long curfews, we were homebound and there was nothing to do. So the elders decided to go back to the family's old craft. And I think that it was just a ruse to keep us kids busy so that they don't, do something dangerous. So I remember painting these little Easter eggs. I think I was bad at it. But my uncle was good, and he also had aspirations of being a proper artist. He used to make these Persian scenes and so on. So all those went into the novel. This protagonist is Faiz. He's a paper mache artist, and he is from a very old Shia family in Srinagar, and he falls in love with a Sunni girl in the neighborhood. Good old Romeo Juliet. But then I tried to sort of upend the Romeo Juliet construct, and there was no feud in the families. They actually, get together to make this union possible, because there is a larger source of conflict and stress and madness in town, which is the war in Kashmir. That was loosely what, have I answered your question?
You have. And will you kind of please read us a bit from... उसमें शिया सुन्नी भी भाई भाई हो जाते हैं ना, तो जंग की वजह से.
So I think I'll read a little bit Shia Sunni Bhai Bhai. I will read a little bit of Faiz. This is towards the beginning of the story and the beginning of the novel, where he is painting his little things. Faiz, he has this little workshop in this grand, old, slightly crumbling house in the old city. He has this little workshop, small room, where he sleeps and works. Faiz scratches the paint from his nails, not all of it though, as he sometimes feels different, less himself, if he does not see his hands flecked with the colors he has worked with during the day, and tries to decide whether he should go to the mosque or to the shrine first. He turns on the radio to listen to All India Radio's Urdu service, which plays the best music for evenings such as these, the finest ghazals he can find on any radio station. He turns to his creations, the floor full of them, finished, semi-finished, and just begun pieces spread all around him. The half-done pencil boxes present hills and jungles in formation, and animals in chase with no quarry in sight. A tiger sparkles golden hair, and a deer cranes its neck against the blue of the sky. A lion reclines, its eyes red with passion, and end of its tail a fine blonde goblet, Faiz's signature style, and a would-be master's sign, Rangre's the old paint seller says. Only one box is fully finished and varnished. Faiz did it at the beginning as a sample for Peer, who wants all the boxes to look exactly like this one. This is always the specification, Faiz knows. And that is why he always keeps the master artifact in front of him. But he can never quite bring himself to produce exact replicas, even though he is capable of it. He will always add a little something to each piece. A tiny nightingale that peeks out of a corner bush, a gazelle darting across a border, a kingfisher's reflection in a talker's pool, a Persian couplet intertwined with a forest vine. The only time he does not do it is towards the end of a job. The only time he does not do it is when, towards the end of a job, he starts to worry he has been away too long from his secret personal work in progress, Falaknuma, the biggest canvas he has ever embarked on, his life's work. His eyes stop on a small screen he had finished just before the pencil boxes arrived. It's a copy of the painting Mustafa Peer, the middleman, had allowed him to trace with pencil in his presence, taking the original back with him when Faiz was done. In the center of the screen, the Persian poet Umar Khayyam, leaning against ornate cushions on a narrow boat, is holding a paper mache cup into which a woman with the most beautiful hair Faiz has ever seen is pouring wine from a long curved flask. The flow of the wine, by design it seems, reflects the woman's tresses. The river the boat is floating along, there is no boatman, is a pale blue, revealing dark weeds, water plants, and golden fish. Tall grasses grow on either side of the river, and the world outside is not visible except for the blue-black sky that has no moon but a multitude of stars. Faiz remembers painting each of them with great care, washing his brush for every new star. He turns back to the center of the screen and remembers the cup. Was the painting on the cup a miniature replica of the main painting? Khayyam is again holding a cup as the woman with the dark hair pours wine into it. The evening is beginning to slip into night. Faiz switches off the radio and heads out.
Thank you for that. Are you going to read us another passage?
What would you like?
Yeah, sure, please.
So I'm going to quickly introduce the other character, the girl he sees, and then we see what we can do later. I like to think, some days I like to think there are these characters in the novel, but there is a shrine at the center of the novel, both physically and also in the narration, I think. And that is, I think, assume the life of a character. And there's a river, which is based on the real river, Jhelum, which flows through Srinagar. So I'm going to read a little bit of that. Ruhi lets her hair fall long at the window and closes her eyes as the breeze from the river comes through the gaps in the glass. This is another thing of which Mummy and her neighbors disapprove. Why doesn't she cover her head? Why must she comb her hair by the window? We say this because if she carries on like this, she's bound to attract the evil eye at some point. Why must she show herself to every stranger walking by? She shouldn't do it, and you should just do something about it. I have told her so many times. But children these days, you know how headstrong they are. My father would have dragged me down by my hair if I dared to do so. Even slapped me a few times. But you see, you can't hit a grown-up daughter, can you? At least I can't. She's my only daughter after all. It is early evening. Ruhi is content to have warded off yet another marriage proposal, the sixth in all since her college and university life ended, brought by the younger aunt. Aunts, always with marriage proposals, seriously. They mean well, of course. The Jhelum is racing down by the ghat, its journey marked by swallows in pursuit. They will run along to the next bridge or the one after it, then disappear for the night. Many have their tiny nests inside the vast labyrinthine woodwork that supports the old bridges. Lights are borne along the two banks, hundreds of tassels, stained glass and embroidered windows pouring charms and warm shadows of Srinagar's oldest residents into the water. Men of houseboats, intimate friends of the river, and the city's forgotten heroes sit on their jetties, while the women, far more heroic, some believe, than the men, as they keep order inside the boathouse and defend their patch on the river, pump life into their kerosene stoves. Down on the Zaina Kadal bridge, hawkers, keen to go home without any of their wares, shout out their last-minute sales pitches before curfew time. Fatigued fishermen are pulling their boats upstream to get to their homes on time, or are resting by the steps of the ghat, their oars wedged between rock faces of the bank like outstretched arms. This river made the city. This river made the city, and the city has tried to unmake it over the centuries. While it brings the heavenly waters of the emerald Verinag spring from the hem of the Pir Panjal mountains, the city thwarts its dreams, pouring refuse, bad wishes and dark stories into it. Of late it has also started carrying the dead, many tales of cruelty drowning in its onward rush, and with them the dark deeds of the oppressor too. It has moved mountains, yes. It has bestowed life on the enslaved tiller through the ages, yes. And it has brought romance to this old city too. But the city has proved to be an unfaithful lover. This city's rulers, its little tyrants, have tried to blacken its face, suppressed its soul, and poured rock into its heart. And yet, even after so many insults to its pride, the river lives on. The city tamed the river. Gone are the days when it could put the fire of the deluge into the hearts of the townsfolk. People say it will take whatever you throw into it, but people are wrong. People are wrong. The river can break barriers of lead when it is angry. This river is witnessing the decay of the city. There never was a more fitting revenge. It is just that people are blind. While you are busy burying your filth in it, while little tyrants plunder the mystic arcs of its bridges, while the occupier lays siege to it, the river has tender things to attend to. It has a love story to write.
Thank you, Wahid. That was beautiful. Do you think till the time this occupation continues, Kashmir will remain your subject? Do you think it's difficult to get away and write about other subjects, other places?
Yes, I mean, if I think I'll write about Kashmir all my life, and I think that's a fairly that's a fine thing to do, because Orhan Pamuk, of course, everyone knows Orhan Pamuk. He's written about Turkey all his life. He hasn't even left Turkey ever, but yeah, he's Orhan Pamuk. So I am no Orhan Pamuk, of course, but I will write about Kashmir because it is a part of who I am. It is part of my upbringing. It's part of my life. It's part of my mother lives there, and that's vitally important. But yes, of course, I want to write about other things, because I want to write novels that are set elsewhere, that are set in Karachi or London, or the Middle East. Why not? I want to write a TV series one day, because that makes you a lot of money. I've been told recently. Yeah, you get on Netflix and and you're made. So one day I would write, So I'm trying to write something which may not be set in.
Okay, and you, as you mentioned earlier, you've written some very, very fine essays as well. One of those was that after the last crackdown, and the curfew lasted 70, 80 days again?
Nearly 100 days.
Nearly 100 days. And one of the most shocking things that happened in Kashmir was that people were being blinded willfully through the use of these something which is called a non-lethal weapon. The last, I think, figure that I read in your essay was 972, I think. The people kind of, it's a horrible thing to have happened in any civilized society. So he wrote an essay kind of basically is trying to tell us that this thing does not happen anywhere in the world. Like, you might think that there are places worse off in the world. And not only it doesn't happen in the world that we live in, it hasn't happened in the past as well. हमने बचपन में कहीं ना कहीं पे कहानियाँ पढ़ी होंगी कि मुग़ल बादशाह किसी से नाराज़ हो गया तो उसने उसकी आंखों में वो गरम सिलाइयाँ जो हैं उस तरह की मैंने कहानी. Please tell us a little bit about this phenomenon of blindings by the Indian state and in history, how it has worked.
I wish I didn't have to write an essay like that, and I'm being completely honest. You don't want to, but it just, the idea possessed me in that I'm sure everyone would agree that this sort of thing doesn't happen every day or every week. This is not the kind of news that you read often, that there are these young people who are being systematically blinded by. The weapon is called a buckshot gun, birdshot. Now, the birdshot was invented to hunt birds, and the weapon is designed to spray these little tiny pellets in various directions. the explicit, specific purpose is to catch prey in flight. Because how else do you get lots of birds with one? That's as we all know. Then to have the same kind of thing sprayed on young people, it just upset me a lot and a lot. Yeah, so then what you do, this is what you do, you write. And as you said, you have to research, you have to find out what's going on, when did this last happen. And I found parallels, small parallels in Egypt, in the Tahrir Square revolution. There was a notorious army officer of the Egyptian army who was known as the eye sniper. This was part of my, you read online, you do some lazy sort of research. So he'd shot some people in the eye deliberately. He was apparently good at it, but the Egyptian army was actually then embarrassed, and they had to put him in jail. And in Palestine is the closest parallel, where the Israeli army is often accused of testing newer kinds of crowd control weapons on Palestinians for free. So they've tried, they've used what I call sponge-tipped bullets, rubber-tipped bullets, foam bullets, all kinds of things, and they've blinded a few Palestinian youth in 2000, I think recently. And the other thing I found was in Spain. There was a woman who was blinded by the Spanish police, and she took the Spanish government to court, and she won. She lost one eye. I found those parallels, but as you absolutely rightly said, there was no parallel in history. I couldn't find anything. Back in the day, yes, as you said, there were these kings and tyrants who, in order to spare the life of an enemy or a prisoner, कि चलो इसकी जान नहीं लेते हैं, इसको सिर्फ अंधा करते हैं. That sort of thing. They were being kind.
Yeah, an act of mercy.
An act of mercy. And those things then, to have to witness those things in 2016, and more so in a patch that you call home, was deeply upsetting. And
now, and everybody's seen the pictures, and I'm sure, one can understand that why Indian state or BJP's government would do something like that. But there is sort of world's largest kind of democracy, free press, itni badi middle class, itne padhe likhe log, itni universities. Do you think that people outside of Kashmir kind of get it, that what's going on?
I don't think a lot of people, is my personal, is what I feel. I don't think a lot of people understood the scale and the viciousness of the response of the Indian state. Because it is one of those things ki, this is Kashmir, this sort of things happens in this place, there are these Kashmiris, what is the matter with them? Because I once talked to a Pakistani friend who doesn't live in Pakistan, who lives in the States, and he asked me, what is your problem? And seriously, so that sort of thing permeates all kinds of sections of society and media. That's one. But two, then there is the willful, dishonest misrepresentation in large sections of Indian media, and I have no qualms in saying it anywhere, and I've said it in my essays as well. They actually were asking their state to be harsher. I'm talking about TV, large sections of TV. And of course, I must emphasize that not every part of Indian media is like that. There's great rigor in the print sections, many sections of which did ask the state to kind of, stop doing that. They didn't listen. But on prime time, there was a daily hunt going on for, it was literally asking the state to be ruthless, to be even more ruthless. There was one thing that struck me as completely odd and disturbing, was a major newspaper ran an online poll where the question was, should Indian armed forces in Kashmir use bullets, pellets, none? the idea of the poll was disturbing enough, but then the response was overwhelmingly in favor of bullets. And so when you have come to that place in the world, and I don't think it's now limited to India alone. This is where we you know. But yeah, going back to your question, there was not enough criticism of the state in India. There were not enough calls by India's thinkers, people who matter, to ask them to stop. Yes, there were calls, but they were in a minority. There was encouragement. There was some hope in some quarters, the usual places. JNU, as we all know, famous. They were brave and they stood out. Calcutta, there were big protests against what was going in Kashmir. In South India, there were protests. One has to say all those things in the same sort of place. There was that. In South India, people took out protest marches against this thing. But this was probably the worst. I grew up during the first uprising. I saw the response of that time firsthand. I witnessed it. I suffered it like everyone did. This 2016 was similar, but more vicious. There was a certain vengefulness to the response, I thought. There was a revanchist streak to the whole thing. As if the soldiers, the paratroopers, the paramilitary people were told that spare no one, and hit them hard. It became evident because in the media there were these calls, and then the security officials who were interviewed in the press, they were quite, poker-faced, and when they said that we are exercising restraint. This is when they had killed about 90 people and blinded hundreds, and including 5-year-old girls and a 14-year-old girl who sadly became the iconic, face of the summer, Insha, who lost vision in both her eyes, and she wasn't even protesting. You see, not that you deserve to be blinded if you're a protester. She was home.
A couple of quick questions, and then we'll open it to the audience. Abhi main ek pooch lun, uske baad aap poocho. There's, like, going back to your books, there's the idea of there's the idea of a border and a line of control, and people kind of go on to the other side and then return. Is Pakistan seen now, currently, seen as a part of the solution or as a part of the problem? Is there
Both.
Both. Both. Okay.
No, but I'll try to explain. I mean, it's the Pakistani state, to me, increasing sometimes seems opportunistic, and one should sort of say these things in as clear words as possible everywhere. The state is opportunistic, so they see they see bloodshed and trouble in Kashmir. They will go to the various international forums and say, "Look what India is doing in Kashmir." Then when the tempers calm down, then they forget about it. So I think the state uses Kashmir as a stick with which to poke India. That's one. But that is different from what is felt in Pakistani society. Kashmiris are, they're encouraged by the solidarity they saw amongst the Pakistani public. There were campaigns that were launched from here. I wish those campaigns had happened when similar things happen in Pakistan. That is, no, it's important. I think they should, because if you have this tendency and you have this desire and you have this, we must stand with those people suffering. There's your neighborhood. You should look at that as well. But largely, Kashmiris they see Pakistan as a friend. Kashmiri people see Pakistan as a friend. Pakistani state, we all know they do things which serve their interests sometimes. But overall, the Pakistani state is a party to the dispute. You can't change that. In the way India is a party to the dispute, in the way Kashmiris are the primary party to the dispute, Pakistan is an official party to the dispute. It's there listed in the UN. So yeah, friend. But I wouldn't go as far as to say as foe. Because there was great waves of sympathy.
एक आखिरी और अहम सवाल का जवाब दीजिए, उसके बाद आप लोगों से पूछते हैं, कश्मीर के अवाम हाफिज सईद से कितनी मोहब्बत करते हैं?
Okay. 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 No, no. Sorry, who?
प्लीज़ आप लोग माइक्स होंगे बारी बारी, टाइम कम है, सवाल मुख्तसर रखिएगा ताकि ज़्यादा लोगों से बात कर सकें.
जी Waid, my name is Azmat Baloch and I'm a social and political rights activist. We all feel sorry that what you have experienced in your childhood, and we do appreciate how you expressed your frustrations in the shape of very good novels and books. So today Balochistan is suffering from same kind of political uncertainty. So have you ever thought or planned to write something about Balochistan as Hanif has noticed it?
Actually, as a matter of, I have done some work indirectly on Balochistan. I used to work for the BBC for a decade. I worked in the BBC for a decade, exactly for.
ये एडिटर
Then
थे
it-
तो
soon-
बहुत सारी
if you
चीज़ें
let me,
लिखवाते
if
थे,
you
यही
if you
लिखवाते
if you
थे.
let me finish, I will try to answer, but you can question me. I commissioned a lot of work on Balochistan. We were the only organization in a particular year when no one was talking about disappeared people of Balochistan. This is before the last few years when Pakistani TV started talking about it. It was my decision to have disappeared people, the kin of disappeared people, in a studio in Islamabad and get government people and sit with them, and they were asked. We did an hour-long program. This is many, many years ago. This is not recent when, I didn't write like essays about Balochistan because I was an editor at the time. My job was to get work done. But it struck me as odd that there's this massive, massive issue, and nobody in Pakistan was talking about disappeared people at the time, which at the time resulted in the Supreme Court asking the government to answer questions. It is not much. It is never enough. I completely agree, But I did try to do that as part of my journalistic work. Will I write about Balochistan? Yes, one day I will. Because I know what it means to,
Freedom for the valley in your lifetime?
this is a slightly difficult question to answer because I'm not a political scientist. I write novels. I tend to tell stories. I like to think of myself as a novelist and a journalist. Of course, who wouldn't want to be free? Especially when you've seen the kind of oppression Kashmiris have seen or the Baloch people have seen. Why wouldn't you desire that day when it's free? But in a broader context, Kashmiris have been saying to both these two behemoths that surround Kashmir that actually it might be a very simplistic idea, and the language is also simplistic, that it could actually work, that if you solve Kashmir, there will be lasting peace. There might be lasting peace, which might be good for a lot of people across this patch of South Asia. Because it is, I think, futile and rather silly to pretend that India and Pakistan can have a nice and happy relationship without resolving Kashmir. Because there was talk a few years ago that if you isolate Kashmir, but we can have trade and we can have this. Come on. Yes, you can have films, screenings in each other's countries, and you can export. When they need onions, they can come from Pakistan. When you need something, But will that mean that they will have lasting peace without resolving that issue? I don't think so.
Hello, yeah. So I wanted to ask you, how were the surgical strikes perceived in Kashmir?
There was skepticism initially, There was skepticism initially, but they did take place apparently, and a lot of Kashmiris felt that this was, this was the Indian state, this was the Modi government trying to deflect attention from what the Indian state was doing inside Kashmir. That was one of the main views was that.
I wanted to ask you about your first novel, The Collaborator. right here. The central protagonist that you chose to tell the story through is, for me, was very unique, complicated, someone that probably a lot of Kashmiris would not have sympathy for. So I wanted to ask why you chose that. And secondly, when you're writing about conflict and a war zone, does fiction make it more accessible and easier to write about, or does it re-traumatize in creating new stories of trauma?
The choice of the protagonist. I mean, yeah. I mean, if there is not enough, there is not enough ambiguity in your fiction, in your novelistic approach. I didn't. It is a boy, and he grows up in that time, but he hasn't lost his humanity. When he's growing up, he likes nice things in life. He likes music and art and books, you know. And then his life is transformed, upended, whatever you call it, is changed completely. He has different views on, as compared to his friends. His friends just, you know, see the oppression and the brutality, and they just flee and become militants. He's slightly more conflicted compared to those. That's one. Two, I was also trying to point out in the differences within Kashmir. Because it's not just, Kashmir is not just the valley or mainstream Kashmiri Muslims. There's also Gujars, there's other ethnicities, there's other linguistic background, different linguistic backgrounds, and there are different regions of the state. So I was also trying to point out that I like the idea of that kind of character who's not mainstream, who's on the margins, who's on the fringes, because that also gives him a slightly different perspective on things. A lot of this thing happened without my choosing to do so.
Mirza, hi.
Sorry.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi, good to hear you. I just want to ask, in terms of creating the novel, how much you felt that you were contributing to the narrative about what was going on in Kashmir, and whether you were felt more unrestricted by writing a novel, but at the same time, because of your success as a novelist, you've also been drawn into the political discussion as well. And do you feel that had you maybe not written a novel, but you just become a commentator, you wouldn't have been quite so powerful as you are now as a novelist?
No, yeah, this is a good question. As I said, I was a journalist at the BBC when I wrote my first novel. And it did allow me a vast amounts of freedom compared to the 2-page report that you have to prepare in 2 hours, because it's going to go in a bulletin or it's going to go on a website. Those are restrictions of the format in journalism, and but the novelistic form, obviously, I think it's a great form in that it allows unlimited freedom, compared to many other genres, and there you can do anything with a novel that you choose to. As a commentator, this role I'm not entirely comfortable in, but you don't have a choice. I don't do it I'm not forced to do it. But you don't have a choice. As I said in an earlier session, the novelist Aminata Forna once said that if you grow up in a civil war, a horrific, brutal civil war, and it affects you, your friends, your street, your family, your father, your mother, do you have a choice to write about other things then? Especially if that's all you've seen all your life. Especially with regard to your first books and everything, that is what has been in your head for a long time, and the best way for me at the time seemed the novelistic form. As a commentator, I try not to, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I have 2 questions. First is for Mr. Mohammad Hanif. Sir, I want to know, up in the end of this, the answer given by him, just tell me, what was that one reason that led Pak 1 crash? Because I just read your book and I'm still confused.
What's the question for?
Yes, for him, I want to ask that if we see that this book that you just read few passages, I'm very interested to buy that and I would love to read it. But what I see is that so far it's a love story amid all conflicts that are going on in Kashmir. The ethnical issues and the sectarian problems and everything. Sir, I want to know that since Pakistan has a stake in Kashmir, Indians have the stake in Kashmir, the identity crisis of Kashmiri people, and in that very identity crisis, falling in love and thinking about romance or anything like romanticism, how it can be, it is probably different in any other situation, but how love evolves in Kashmir.
I think you should read the novel to find out, seriously.
How love
Seriously,
evolves.
I know, I promise you.
I
I've tried
very
to.
highly recommend it. यहाँ पे बुक शॉप्स हैं, वहाँ पे द बुक ऑफ गोल्ड लीव्स पढ़ा है, आप लोग भागें और लेके आएँ और इनसे साइन करवाएं, and then you will find out that how love evolves in Kashmir or anywhere in the
Or
world.
anywhere, actually.
One last question, anyone? Yeah. Yeah.
I want. Oh.
You first.
I think it's good. It's great to have a reader, because after all, why does one write? So that somebody will read it, and to have somebody who will be kind of will give you honest and responsible and kind of a feedback is great, because also a reader is kind of sort of an illusion. How does one know who is going to read this thing? So when you're writing it, to have like those few people in mind, your initial readers, kind of gives you something to kind of go on, that okay, if I can sort of make him laugh, or if I can keep him interested like for a few pages, that means that maybe I have a hope of kind of finishing this thing at some point.
I think he's answered the question. You trust someone's judgment, and for me, it's like you will have 2 or 3 people read your first draft or second draft, wherever you are comfortable to take it out of your house, and that sometimes is enough if you know these people, as in they're readers, as Hanif said, they're primarily readers, readers you happen to know. And giving it to a lot of people means then you end up writing lots of books in the same book. So, and I think I also say I'm sort of lazy. So rather than going out to the world, you say कि वो पास में बंदा बैठा है उसको दे दो किताब.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Mr.
for
Wahid.
coming.
Please go and buy the book. Yeah.